Okay. So welcome to what's going to be our last pre-consensus Friday for a while. We've made the decision in the last AU Core TDG to not continue holding these. So that brings our meeting cadence down to just fortnightly for the AU Core Technical Design groups. But they're going to be 90-minute sessions so that we can get through talking through the content through to resolution in those meetings. So what we do typically, or have been doing on our pre-consensus Fridays, is that these are a bit more of an informal session. So we bring through topics that we're working on, and sometimes that is going into more detail and doing a bit more of an education session. Sometimes it's forming a proposal. I guess sometimes it's bringing new topics and trying to start to talk through those and what might be involved. And today there's a couple of topics, and I'm going to hand over to Heath to walk those through. And I just wanted to reconfirm for everybody, this is not an official technical design group meeting, so we're not voting on anything. This is the opportunity to talk through topics, raise questions. If there's anything that you're not clear on, you want more detail on, just pop your hand up and we'll like stop and go through that particular item. So over to you, Heath.
Thanks, Danielle. Yeah, absolutely. This is really more of a discussion, perhaps just to make sure we're all on the same page. Just going to walk through some stuff. So just to get a bit of a sense, if I can you put your hand up if you did not attend the face-to-face TDG, whether it was virtual or face-to-face, but on the 16th of May, just who's on the call that wasn't at that session? Okay, so not too many. All right. So, and can I also get you to put your hand up if you haven't actually had a look at the AU Core capability statement resources and the conformance requirements associated with that, if you have not. Okay. So only a couple. That's good. So we might be able to sneak through it pretty quickly then, because I pretty much just did it with the assumption that people haven't looked at it, but perhaps we can just make sure that we're all understanding what it's currently saying, and ask some open questions, etc., and go from there. So I guess what we're trying to do as an outcome of this session is just to gauge whether there is any need for some changes before release 1 is finalized for ballot. So that is, we're not making any decisions, but we're just kind of trying to get some sense of whether we're all in agreement that things are okay as they stand. So the agenda, we're just going to walk through the AU Core Responder capabilities at the moment. In particular, we're going to dive into the security aspects of things. So Michael will go through some things there that we're perhaps making a suggestion that we might need to firm up a little bit. And then we're going to look at the capabilities by resource as well. And what does that mean? And pretty much AU Core Requester is almost the same. So if we don't get to agenda item 3, I'm not so concerned because it's kind of almost a mirror of the AU Core Responder. And I think we'll have done it to death by then. I just wanted to start off with basically reiterating what was presented on the 16th of May that we now have since the previous ballot in our continuous build version of AU Core 040, it wasn't in 030, is the specific definitions of 2 AU Core actors. So we actually have formally defined using the FHIR actor definition resource the actor of AU Core Requester, and it's pretty much defined as the system responsible for initiating queries for information from an AU Core responder, and that the set of capabilities defined for this actor is defined by the AU Core Requester capability statement resource. And then there's the mirror of that, the AU Core Responder actor, and which is defined as the system responsible for providing responses to the queries submitted by an AU Core requester, and that the same capabilities defined for that actor are in the AU Core Responder capability statement. So if we move on to the equivalent AU Core capability statements, we've got a definition of what they are, and that basically the capability statement for AU Core Requester are the rules, the basic rules for the AU Requester actor responsible for creating and initiating the queries for information, and the list of profiles, the RESTful operations, and the search parameters that are supported by the AU Core Requester actor. And basically the flip side of the AU Core Responder, where it's responsible for providing responses to those queries and the associated profiles, operations, and search parameters. And I should really be using the term interaction, not operation, because the term operation actually has a specific meaning in FHIR. So that really should be probably considered as a change in the definition wording. Any questions thus far? Okay, so I started to try and get a bit of an idea visually. I'm a visual person. I like to see things as diagrams to actually start to understand how these all hang together. So I quickly did this actually at the end of the day on the 16th of May. I thought it was probably worth sharing it with you guys, because there's probably maybe some people out there similar to me that like to see this in a diagram. Probably the more technical diagram than I'm used to presenting at these forums, but the actor definition resource is of the AU Core Actor Responder is here on the left. It basically specifies the capabilities of that actor is defined by this capability statement. So we've now got an AU Core Responder capability statement resource. And it then has a set of profiles. So this is basically a set of resources. So it's an array of profiles. And so this one is an example of the patient resource being supported by this responder, and what that profile is being pointing to an actual structure definition. Now this is a 0 to 1 relationship, so there is only one profile that you can point to for this resource type of patient, but then there are multiple supported profiles that you can also define.
We just pause there and go, does anyone want a quick explanation of the difference between profile and supported profile in a capability statement?
I think it's worth going through, I think, just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Do you want to do that, Danielle?
Well, I thought you were on a roll. You're sharing your screen.
Okay, so my understanding of the difference between profile and supported profile is that if a profile is defined, then basically that is the base profile that any resource that is submitted to that FHIR server will be validated against. So that's the base profile for that resource type. So in this particular example, what this would mean is that by default, my server is accepting patient resources with a profile of AU Core patient. Now, if you also specify in the supported profiles a list of other profiles, such as the IPS profile or US core profile, or perhaps your own company or vendor's profile, then that can go into the supported profile list. And if someone actually specifies that profile in the meta.profile element, then that would be accepted and validated against that. So, Danielle, are you okay with that description? Is it aligned with
am.
your meaning?
I mean, it is. It is. I mean, exactly. That's what that profile does. It provides the system-wide profile that's applied across all instances. So essentially, it's your superset. The most obvious example of this is observation. For example, if you accept all sorts of different kinds of observations, you can't just put pathology result at that profile level and then expect to be able to do body height, because it just won't work. So what you set at that profile level is the system-wide one, and sometimes there won't be one any more restrictive than just the FHIR resource itself. And sometimes you do actually have a superset defined that you want to apply those rules for your system, and you use that element there to set that rule.
So supported profile would actually be used more in your own implementation, so that your server's capability statement or your client's capability statement. But as far as AU Core is concerned, it doesn't have any supported profiles, or sorry, except for the exception that Danielle suggested, the observation resource type. But it's something like AU Core. This particular example of patient, it is actually AU Core patient is what is specified in the profile, and there are no supported profiles. But this is the AU Core responder capability statement, not a particular implementation of AU Core responder capability statement. Hopefully I haven't confused anyone by more so.
Heath, in this scenario, could profile just be patient and the supported profile be AU Core patient?
Yeah.
And maybe US Core patient?
Yeah.
Depending on your implementation.
Yeah, in your own implementation, you might say, I will take any patient. In fact, it is optional, so you don't even have to specify it at all. And then only specify supported profiles.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's what Happy does. For example, if you spin up a Happy instance and you add IGs into it, it automatically populates the supported profile elements with your IG in that supported profile element, but it doesn't set the profile element because you actually have to do that specifically, independent of any particular IG. So moving on to the structured definition, I just wanted to actually explain also this loop. So loop back, and this is related to what we've been talking about in these sessions, must support and obligations. So I'm articulating here basically an obligation extension for the patient AU Core patient structure definition or profile, and it actually has a link back to the AU Core responder and also another AU Core requester. So it's multiple extensions of type obligation. It actually specifies what the obligation is for an individual responder. So basically, within these three definitional resources within FHIR, we've got this full loop going through here. So for me, this was kind of a bit of a light bulb moment on how this is all fitting together. And hence why I needed to actually draw this out to get the fact of what we're actually doing here. Okay, so hopefully that hasn't confused people. Hopefully it's helped. So moving on, this is perhaps a little bit hard to read, I'm sorry, but basically I'm just pointing you in the direction of what we're about to talk about going forward. So focusing on AU core responder capability statement at the moment, and in particular the RESTful capabilities. So what we've got here is a few general comments or conformance requirements that the AU core responder shall support the AU core patient resource profile and shall support at least one additional resource profile from the list of AU core profiles. So currently, that is what AU core is articulating to any implementation that is stating conformance to the AU core responder actor, is that you must have support for AU core patient resource and at least one other resource profile from AU core. So to be AU core compliant, you must implement a patient and you must implement something like a condition or an allergy or a procedure, but you at least have to do patient and one other. Is there any comments on that? And is that perhaps something that people didn't realize? I'm just looking for some feedback and whether that people think that that's fair.
It's with the one other profile. Does that have to be a profile that is related to patient, as in the condition or allergy? I mean, if people wanted to have something like an organization, would that be valid, or does it need to be something that's more related to the patient?
That's a good point.
Well, right now, as written, it's just one other. And that is, yeah, that's fine. That's just one other.
I mean, I guess I having not written this originally, I don't know what the original intent was, but my interpretation of what the intent was is that we were thinking about this from a patient-centric profile perspective, that basically you need to at least do patient and you probably want to do some clinical information associated with that patient. So although what the scenario you talked about would actually satisfy those conformance requirements, does it satisfy the original intent? And is that actually still our intent of AU core? Could this be used for non-patient? Could we have a system that wants to be able to say they're AU core compliant, but actually not even support the patient resource?
I'll make one comment on because I am very interested to hear that and how we want to shape this. Although it's not in the list yet, if we said, for example, care tips. So there's really, I guess what I'm getting at, there's probably only a couple of resources that aren't directly or can't be directly related to a patient. And I expect something like care team, for example, patient and care team, would be something that, I mean, we might look at in R2. I'm not quite sure how far the AUCDI R2 scope is going yet. I'm kind of waiting on that advice to help us define our direction. But I think some of it can definitely be around the administrative aspects and doesn't have to be clinical.
I mean, if we were working in reverse, I guess if we were probably thinking about the original intent, if we were going to do a condition, it makes it, you pretty much have to have a patient. But at the same time, you pretty much got to have a practitioner or a practitioner role. And then, so it spawns out. So is it even necessary to have this kind of constraint to say that you at least have to have patient, because it's kind of implicit by the time you actually specify that you're supporting condition because the subject's mandatory.
I would suggest that we would, if we move to something that where we, instead of saying support the AU core patient resource and one additional, that if we move to something conditional, we would list a number of the ones that we think you shall implement patient for. And they would be, I guess, the clinical related or the administrative ones around care team, if we ever put that in there and say that you shall implement patient if you implement one of these. And I don't think it's a shall on practitioner or practitioner role. The reason I say this is patient is a shall search param. And so that's really quite tied in, that it's not just, although we haven't constrained the reference type, you can indeed not implement the practitioner resource when you implement condition. I don't think that's a great idea, but it is possible. Whereas I don't think that's possible, or it shouldn't be, for patient.
Anyone want to comment, Melvin?
So with the, I'm thinking back to your question, Heath, around the intent of this. If somebody was to, you know, I guess claim some sort of conformance, and they, you know, say they were using AU Core Patient, but they were using just a base R4 condition or a base R4 allergy intolerance,
They would not be compliant to AU Core Responder. They might be profile only. There are requirements in there, which I guess is not in these bullet points yet, in that if you claim conformance to the capability statement and it covers any of those resources in there, so you say, I'm an AU Core Responder and I do conditions, you shall conform to AU Core condition, a profile and its interaction requirements. Because it's setting it at an actor level, not just piece by piece. The piece by piece is profile only, where you can just say, I just do the AU Core patient profile. That's it. I've got other resources. But if you're claiming that you meet the capabilities of an AU Core responder, then any of the applicable resources, you have to meet those capabilities as defined.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, unless there's some further feedback, I can move on to the next point, which are starting to just get into reviewing what's there. So the next requirement is that they shall implement the RESTful behavior according to the FHIR specifications. So we're just referring back to the general specification on how to implement a REST API. We're then basically saying that as a responder, that these are the response types that you can return in the case of errors. So basically you can use the 400 as a bad request, not authorized for unauthorized, 403 when there's permission issues, and 404 when a resource is not found. And then we're saying that you shall support JSON format of AU Core interactions. So that's the format of the resource that we're going to return as part of our responses. And again, it's kind of we're declaring that a capability statement, identifying the list of profiles, operations, search parameters that are supported. And then there's a should for AU Core Responder, that is that you should also support XML format for all AU Core. So we're saying that you must have JSON and you should also support XML, and it's up to the client which one they need to retrieve. So if you want XML, they can ask for XML. Otherwise, you can return JSON as the default. We're not actually talking about what you should do as your default, but basically you should at least be able to support a JSON response. Any questions on that? Now, having reviewed this yesterday, this was obviously that was a narrative description of our conformance requirements. There is actually some structured parts of this capability statement. So right at the top of the page, above where that narrative was a couple of items that basically repeated the idea of the supported formats. So shall support JSON, shall support XML, or sorry, should support XML. But the next one also indicated that we've got patch formats and that we've got a should support JSON patch formats here. Now, we didn't have that now narrative. So I'm being really, I guess, picky, but if someone is actually reading the narrative and it's not there, and perhaps have skipped over this more structured part at the top, which is really just a rendering of what's explicitly stated in the underlying JSON representation of these capability statements, then they might actually miss this point. So I guess what I'm suggesting is maybe we should also include this patch format into that narrative if this is actually a requirement. But I'm also perhaps putting it out there, is this actually a should or is it a may as well? Anyone have some comments or don't care?
I agree that it should be consistent. So we're absolutely say it in the narrative and in the structured part. Whether it's a should or a may, I don't have particularly strong view on.
Marvin?
I suspect the complexity of a patch might push it into the may.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It is complex.
Yeah, I was going to ask you explicitly, Michael, because I know that you looked into this for requesting.
Yeah, it's definitely complex. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly my opinion, but patch is just another level that's perhaps beyond one at least.
I think patch is really hard for facade builders. Yeah. I think it makes it it's really difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, I think may is probably more appropriate for
Any other vendors want to comment on this, Landon or Neil? And anyone else?
Oh, for me, it sounds like a may for R1 due to the complexity.
Agree with that. My learned colleagues, yes, I think that we should all agree on the may or should.
We also agree on the may from Hello.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we don't vote here, but this does seem like someone here I expect to see a change request sitting in the AU Core Jira soon. I hope from someone so we can bring that to the TDG and vote on it and get that changed.
Okay. So moving on, just underneath that top section was also this note, and just to explicitly state that, more easily to read, FHIR capability may be allowed by the system unless it explicitly marked as shall not. Okay, so basically what we're saying here is that anything that we haven't talked about, that the underlying standard supports, such as patch or such as a particular element or a particular interaction, a system can still implement that unless in AU Core we say you shall not. Now, I don't know if we've got any examples of that, Danielle.
Yeah, no, spoiler alert, we have yet to say shall not, but it might come. I doubt it. I doubt we'll do that in AU Core, but yeah, we're just being really clear that unless you actually see a shall not, everything that FHIR supports is allowed.
And it's the next up point that is really saying, okay, we've got a number of places where we say you may, but it really is just highlighting the fact that this is probably a useful feature that you might want to consider It's less than a should. We're not really recommending that you do it, but you may want to consider it.
I'll provide some further information on that. So where you see may is related to where we have must support elements, but they're not shoulds. So we don't want to leave complete absence of information about them, but we have included them because they are must support elements. That's what you typically see through the majority of them. But then you also have these things where I think, well, Pete's about to talk to them around why we're just really bringing these to people's attention, because you shouldn't forget about these things.
Yeah. So that was the whole point of that, bringing that to your attention, was because now I'm going to talk about a whole heap of mays. So on the topic of security, there is a section in that capability statement that starts talking about security, and that a server may reject any unauthorized requests by returning a 404, a 403, or a 404, depending on how you implement your authorization issues. And we haven't provided any further guidance around that, but there is some actually pretty good guidance on when you should use one or the other, both in FHIR and in general around HTTP status codes, etc. So, but that's basically what we're saying is, bring these to your attention. You may reject any unauthorized ones using any of those response codes. And the second point is that authentication and authorization systems may support. Any is probably not the right word linguistically, but we may support smart app launch or smart backend service authorization. And when that's not available, or one of those is not available, then basic authentication may be used. So we're just, again, pointing you in the direction of, it would be really good if you can use smart app launch or smart backend service for your authorization. But otherwise, we're going to fall back to perhaps the lowest common denominator of basic auth as a means to be able to authenticate an authorization. Michael?
Heath, just looking at this today again, I think now on our security page in AU Core, we're saying that we should use Smart App Launch. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a conflict here between a should and a may. Okay. So we need to align those. Mm-hmm. So given it's on the security page, I would expect this to change. The system should support Smart App Launch, and when it's not available, may basic authentication may.
Michael, can you take an action to just review that and then raise a tracker for it?
Yeah.
For what needs to change?
Yep.
And another aspect might be that rather than trying to have redundancy all over the place, that we perhaps just refer back to a single source of truth. Might avoid us getting into this situation as the security requirements evolve as well.
Yeah, I think that's the approach that's been done in US Core, where it refers to the security page essentially for these requirements.
Yeah. So we do have this new AU security and privacy page. So this is brand new, right, Michael? This is something that wasn't in what has just been balloted for comment. And this is just some points that are being made on this new AU Core security. The link to this page is down the bottom, being on the build site. So we're basically pointing you to the FHIR standard security considerations page. There's also a safety checklist, which is quite informative, but probably from an Australian perspective, that you also need to be aware of any Australian security, privacy, and consent requirements. And that's, potentially whether it's our privacy laws or any particular jurisdictional security requirements, etc. So we're not saying what they are. We're just saying it's your responsibility to be aware of them. But what we are being explicit about is that you should conform to the FHIR communication security requirements. and you should support the Smart App launch for client authentication and authorization. And there's that mismatch that we've got right there. Any comments on that before we move forward? No. So this is just highlighting what that FHIR communication security page looks at, and it's basically at the moment it's a recommendation that TLS or a version 1.2 or higher will be used for all production data, and basically forbidding SSL and any lower versions of TLS, or limit the support for. So I'll probably I will hand over to you, Michael, to take that further. So
Yes, Phil.
did you want to elaborate any more on this page?
No, I think that's just the position we've got at the moment. So that's fine. That we've just referred to the generic FHIR recommendation there. But I just wanted to introduce a consideration that we might want to introduce on AE Core, where we actually firm up that requirement and basically say the system shall use TLS version 1.2 or higher for data exchange. So that would be the data exchange between the AE Core requester and the responder to ensure that we're using the TLS version 1.2 or higher. So I've just got a couple of slides. I might just go through some of the reasoning there for why we might want to firm that up to a shall.
So the next slide.
Yeah, jump to the next one. So just a bit of a summary of what TLS is. It's transport layer security. So cryptographic protocol that secures communication over the network, ensures the data's privacy, integrity, authentication. So one of the key features it does is encryption. So what it does is protects from a person in the middle attack by encrypting the traffic between the client and the server. It also adds integrity to make sure that the traffic, the payload isn't tampered with, and you can ensure that it hasn't been tampered with during transmission. And also there's authentication in there, so you can actually verify who the communicating parties are, and you're actually talking to who you think you're talking to. I might just jump to the next one. So these are reasons why I believe that we should firm up and say that we should be using or shall be using TLS version 1.2 or above, because there's a number of issues with version 1 and 1.1. They've got outdated cryptographic algorithms, and there's known vulnerabilities, especially with MD5 and SHA-1. They've got weak ciphers that are susceptible to exploits, and they're susceptible to person-in-the-middle attacks. So from the compliance and industry perspective, they're deprecated specifications. So TLS 1 and 1.1 have officially been deprecated, so they're no longer current specifications. The ASD, Australian Cybersecurity Centre, has advised that there should be no more use of version 1 or 1.1 because of the security risks. And nearly all browser and platforms have dropped support for TLS 1 and 1.1. Moving on to the benefits. So 1.2's got enhanced security. It's got stronger cryptographic algorithms, and it's got widespread adoption. So I don't think there's really an adoption problem with specifying 1.2. 1.3 is the latest available at the moment. It's definitely got some improved performance, and it's also got better security. So one of the problems still with 1.2 is that it still has some weak cryptography in it that you can choose to use if you don't explicitly specify which algorithms are used. So 1.3 sort of tightens that up, and it basically closes a lot of those sort of loopholes and the like that are still in 1.2. But I think 1.2 is still seen as industry standard and acceptable and widely used, and there's no real reason that anyone should be using version 1 or 1.1. So I think just to set that sort of base standard for AU Core and make sure everyone's at least at that level to ensure that we're doing secure communication, I think I'd like to sort of propose that we set that shall to use TLS version 1.2 or above on AU Core. So I was just kind of socializing it in this context here today. And I'd be interested if anyone's got any comments or concerns or like about going down that path. If anyone's got any comments here, it'd be great.
I think if we are setting a standard for interoperability for the country, I think it's important for us to specify the minimum that we should be using. And I think you've articulated that quite well. I don't think there's any reason why we should be using anything less than 1.2. So I think as part of the broader ecosystem and standards, this is just one of those, I guess, architectural capabilities that we just need to make sure the industry is aligned with. So yeah, I'd agree.
So you've used the term should. Is it a should or a shall?
Hang on. Shall.
Shall.
Yeah. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely a shell for 1.2, and I think if you're not using at least 1.2, you're really not doing a decent job at all. I think there's a case to even maybe look at identifying the strong ciphers or disallowing the weak ciphers in 1.2, because that's any pen testing, you will get that report and say you are using weak ciphers and you shouldn't do that. Yeah, so it's you know, we're really trying to actually set a quality standard there, and whether that's a should or a shall, or a shall not on the weak ciphers would be a good discussion. But I really think that would be worth doing, because really everyone should be on 1.3, right? So it's so
ASD has some recommendations around that, around the ciphers to use as opposed to ones not to use. It has some recommendations on the correct ones to use. Whether we put, like you said, put that in as a should. You should use these ciphers to provide some further guidance. So again, it's one of those things, if you don't know, you don't know, right?
I actually went through pen testing drama around this explicitly, and you know, it is challenging if you don't know or not aware, to actually think about it up front, because it's
just depending on the gateway or whatever you're using, there'll be all the defaults.
Exactly.
And
which operating system, even operating system support. I had a lot of problems with that with Windows and operating system support, different operating system, Windows versions not supporting certain things. And there's a whole bunch of things to consider. So it's pretty complicated, and I think any Windows developers will know this can be a nightmare with operating systems. So it's especially when you're running out of date operating systems, because that's a real problem as well. Yeah.
Angus?
And I think Cam's mentioned some of that in the chat. I'd be interested to know how you're coping with some of those from desktop software perspective. Sorry, Angus.
Yeah, Angus?
No, we're very much kind of API layer server side stuff, but we do see our client logs that we really struggled with some of the older OS stuff. It's been surprising the number of 2008 clients that were still trying to hit us until very recently, and we forced upgrades for server 2008 R2 and some others. But there's a significant portion that are still quite behind and hitting the end of Microsoft support. And even on non-Microsoft OSs, I've run into issues in the past where apps support 1.2, but the OS they're deployed on in a Docker image or something else don't, and it leads to errors that are very hard to diagnose. So again, this is getting into the weeds, but the so far the spec has been pretty agnostic about a lot of this stuff.
So in summary, Cam, if we made it a shall or a responder and a client to be TLS 1.2 or above, do you see that as a problem? as in a conformance issue for vendors.
Trying to remember when 1.2 was started to be supported in the OSs. It probably goes back to 2006, 7, maybe 8. Trying to remember the history on some of the stuff, but yeah,
it's around that. It's in that ballpark.
Yeah, and Windows 2008 is just out of support. R2 is still in. Again, it's a weird one. I can't really provide more guidance than that at this point. Like, we're still doing .NET Framework code as opposed to core for a lot of stuff for this very reason of legacy support systems.
So just in response to you, Andy, we do have a new page. So that page that I referenced previously, we'll be talking about security constraints. And literally what we're actually talking about here is, well, a couple of slides ago is what's currently on that page, which just references the FHIR standard, which basically has a recommendation of using a TLS. But what Mike was suggesting is that we turn that recommendation into a shall rather than the fluffy stuff that's in FHIR.
Angus
Sorry, Michael?
Angus has got a question.
Yeah, Angus.
I was just going to say, I'm not that the My Health Record is the shining beacon we aim at. It did this a couple of years back, and we had to move everything to 1.2 from 1.1, and it was somewhat painful with Windows servers and whatnot. But I'd make the point that we're far better just start. Like, a lot of this is going to be new stuff, right? So we're better off starting at the minimum bar, because if you don't, it's actually more painful if we let people do 1.1 and then in 3 years from now tell them it has to be 1.2. That'll be far more painful than just telling them up front.
Yeah, I think that's the point. And I mean, eventually it's going to be 1.3, and depending on the ecosystem, we will have to be prescriptive about ciphers and the like. But for at least setting that minimum bar, that we're all near it. That.
I mean, my thoughts are that you know, I'm assuming, I don't know the specifics anymore, but I'm assuming that the My Health Record and Proto and Medicare, etc., are all having this requirement now.
Yeah.
So I would have thought it would have been a pretty standard thing whenever communicating with the government, and that so systems would have to be having some support for this anyway.
Absolutely, and that's what
the
happened.
ISM
It was painful to do, so I'd rather not have to do it again.
Yeah.
The ISM is now actually 1.3 as that minimum bar, so it's actually saying that you need to use 1.3.
So ISM. What's
ISM? The
government information security manual.
Yeah,
well, across government.
Yeah. 1.
It's for government.
1.3 would be not. Yeah, 1.3 is like base level, like good, right? And 1.2 is a little bit, it can be dicey. So
1.2, you have to configure it up to the level, right? It can be configured incorrectly and still have vulnerabilities. Right?
Yeah, but like Cam was saying earlier, like it really is like when you live in an environment where there's little control over the operating systems things are running on, and there's like GP space is classic for this, like where you've got people running varied and old operating systems out of support operating systems and things like that. It's a real problem. So it's it does make it does put the onus back then on maybe some client systems, or if you're running servers on inside on-prem or something like that, where it can be a real issue. It's it's a reality problem. But if you were to look at that from any pen tester would go, that's not adequate, you need to upgrade your operating system and do these things, right? And so I think, to me, it's a quality measure that, I mean, whether you want to put it into the spec or make it part of something else is a good question. Yeah.
I think let's move on. I think we're basically getting some positive feedback on your proposal, Michael. So let's perhaps pursue that further with a specific recommendation for a TDG session.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so flipping back to capability statements, but more around interactions now. So with FHIR, there are actually resource-specific interactions, but there are also system-wide interactions. So AU Core Responder Capability Statement talks about system-wide interactions that we may support. So we may support the transaction interaction, we may support the batch interaction, we may support the search system and history system interactions. And I guess this is starting to get into it's a similar situation when we move to looking at the resource type interactions as well, that there is a series of mays associated with it, but I'd probably just focus on these four at the moment. Going back to why we've actually even included mays, it's because we feel that these are important to point out, that they're available and that they may be useful. So I mean, if there's anyone on the call that don't necessarily understand what these actual interactions are, I'm happy to answer those. Or if there's anyone that thinks that perhaps any of these four are not necessarily useful yet in R1, then happy to hear your thoughts on that.
Or if they need to be upped to a should. I don't think I would advocate for that, but you never know.
Right.
Yeah, I would advocate for that. I would advocate for the batch interaction to go to should. It's really useful as a client capability. If you want to, be able to, do a batch request as a client.
Is that an R1? Should?
Well, I mean, you can live without it, of course, but yeah.
I'm interested in, the vendors on the line. How many of these are actually being used? And again, perhaps just keep it in mind. Obviously, transaction is focused more on write, batch is more on read, although they can be used for both. So there's no explicit ones, but I guess on a think about a normal database transaction, why a transaction all has to succeed, otherwise the whole transaction fails, versus a batch where some can succeed and some can fail and you get a result. So that's the difference really between those two. How many systems sort of support in either of those at a system level?
I've actually set up both for one of our previous apps. Don't know if it should be a should or a may though. Still, it's very useful. But for R1, maybe it stays in a may. I'm not sure.
Okay.
There will also be a lot of systems where, like, the history system interactions actually they're not possible because history is not something that is maintained. For resources, things are just updated, not versions created. So that's also worth noting around the history interactions.
And again, history system and search system, and I'm not completely clear on how they're being used. I've never used them. I've always done a type 1. I'm just wondering if anyone might be able to explain exactly how they're supposed to work. But if I understand, it's looking for any resource.
Yeah, it's looking for anything. Yeah, it'd only be something like if you had a synced server where you want to be able to see everything that changes or something like that in the system, and you'd want to sync up with another destination, right? So you just go, just tell me everything that's changing here.
My thoughts is that the last two are probably not may. I think I get away with the first two as may, especially batch being more of a read-only specification. But transaction might be nice if we're as well for when we read. But I think the last two are pretty advanced.
They're not things that you
yeah,
want to call
unlikely.
attention to.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I think they're pretty unlikely as a case. I think people doing even monitoring changes would go for like subscriptions or specific resource types that they'd be looking for changes on, which are not system-wide, not those system ones. Yeah.
I'll have to call time here where like we're getting closer to time and it's going to be kind of a hard end because I'm running the account, but I'll have to drop close to like 3 o'clock. I mean, yeah, 3 o'clock. So 4 or 5 minutes.
Okay. So you want to call it now, or can I do a 1 minute sort of overview on this one?
No, you absolutely can. I was just giving you like the 4 or 5 minute
Yep.
warning before we have to end the meeting.
So I pretty much just got this introductory slide that, following this part of the capability statement, we start talking about individual resource types. And we've got this table that sort of is a rendering of the underlying JSON or a resource definition, where we're saying basically allergy, read, search, and what search parameters are supported. But then the following sections then go into very specific detail on a per resource basis. So this is an example for allergy and tolerance. But what I wanted to highlight here is that we're actually got these shalls on the interactions. So shall read and shall search, and note that we're now talking search type, as in search against an actual allergy intolerance, not across the entire system. But we also have maze for create, update, delete. There's a version read, the patch, and again, we're talking about history instance. So now we're actually talking about history for a particular identified instance of an allergy. So we can see for allergy X, this is the entire history of allergy X. So probably not time for too much feedback here, but we might have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions. And I guess what I just wanted to make sure is that we're comfortable with this idea of AU core responders being able to create and update and delete as maze, whilst the key requirement for this particular actor is that you shall read and search for this particular resource type or any other AU core profile.
And I guess you'll note that it also doesn't have anything like validate in there, or we haven't mentioned those kinds of interactions either in AU core. I don't know whether or not that's something we do want to flag as a May. I suspect not, but there's some things, some interactions we talk about a lot while we're building out this specification that we haven't included in the capability statement either.
Any comments?
Can you speak to the reference policy comment that's there about resolving? Are there exceptions to that?
I can't. I don't know.
I can. I'll try to whip through it in a couple of minutes. So in a capability statement, and I'll start sharing my screen in just a second. Let me go to the resource in FHIR. So it talks about the kinds of rules, really, or the information you can set. And here's just a general link anyway to when you build together a capability statement, which is a set of rules around what the capabilities are. One of the things you can and should set is your reference policy. And we're talking there about references like how AU core allergy intolerance has a subject element, and that's a reference to another resource. So the reference policy, and I'll just start sharing my screen. Where's that button? Here we go. Yes, please go ahead and share my screen. Okay, people should be able to see that. This is the capability statement resource, and down here is reference policy. And so what you do when you set a reference policy is provide information on how references are expected to be supported according to your capability statement when you're setting those rules. And that is that's handled by a terminology so that you can only select so many different things. And this is the value set here. We might pop that in the chat that talks about the expectations on how you're meant to resolve references, and whether you're using, again, like literal references, whether that is the requirement and therefore that imposes that requirement that all the references are literal, or if it allows logical, which is giving you the example for the reference data type to say, by that we mean reference.identifier. For the one we've got in AU Core here is resolves, and that is that the server will attempt to resolve to literal. Note that attempt. It doesn't mean it fails. If it can't, that's still up to the local policy. But the expectation is if you provide a reference from like allergy intolerance to patient, there's an expectation that it will attempt to resolve those. And then there's like enforced and local. I'm sorry that I don't have more time to go into detail. We can pick up this topic in, well, I guess not the next one because we've stopped doing these now, unfortunately. But you can absolutely flick me an email if you want to go through any of these items, or especially get onto chat.fhir.org down in Australia and post any questions in here, and we can answer those questions and have discussions in this space.
It's a really good question, though. Thank you for asking.
Absolutely. It was awesome. So I'm going to have to, I think, close that meeting here. Final comment from you, Heath?
No, I guess if you've got any comments, in particular that last slide around your thoughts on May, again, probably worthwhile putting it on chat.fire. I might even create that conversation so that we can continue this conversation, so that we can get your feedback on, so that get some guidance on how we might proceed in R1.
And look, also, if there's enough interest to hold another one of these kinds of meetings on a particular topic, then we can do that. So that's, you know, if we're finding that there's enough people who are wanting to get into detail about something, then we'll just hold a session and go through items for sure. All right, so that's it. I think thanks everyone for coming this Friday, and also for all the questions and interaction. That was really, really good. And we've got a number of change requests, I think, out of this that are going to keep improving AU Core. And we'll hopefully find some more stuff and do some more refinement through the AU Core testing that's just been launched. All right, that's it from me.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.